Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this very exciting NCVO launch of the 2023 UK Civil Society Almanac. My name is Alex Farrow. I'm Director of Influencing and Engagement here at NCVO. And today's report is a really important insight into the impact of the pandemic. Our report here in 2023 tells the story of the financial year 2020 to 2021, when, although the pandemic in many ways is still here, the impact of lockdowns and the significant restrictions on our lives affected charities and volunteers, particularly kind of as they responded to the many challenges our communities were facing. And for the first time, we get a real insight into the impact, particularly on income and on expenditure, and then the impact of different types of organisations, particularly size of organisations, and how they have responded. I'm really excited to tell this story. It's not always going to be an easy story to tell, as you might have seen by some of the headlines already in the sector press today around the report and the findings. But today's report does tell us some really interesting and really important things for us, particularly around what it says about the sector's sustainability, where we are now, and what we would need in future should anything happen again. Thank you so much to those of you who are joining in the virtual room. It is fantastic to see so many of you, and welcome particularly to NCVO members. If you are in the room, that is fantastic. Please get involved and join the discussion. Do also contribute online as well using the hashtag Almanac23. Both today, it is great to share, but also continue this conversation after today as well. So let me just run through quickly the agenda for today. We've had a little bit of an introduction by me, and then we will hear directly from Nayara, who is our Research and Insight Manager at NCVO, responsible for the Almanac, to tell us and talk us through many of the different aspects of the Almanac that we're kind of covering and reporting on today. But particularly those things we'll look at insights around finances, so income and expenditure from the sector, a look at workforce, and then some of the trends that we see in volunteering. We use lots of data that both we collect and kind of manage ourselves, but particularly we do a lot of work in partnership with a number of kind of providers and others in the sector. I'll say some proper thank yous at the end, but a big shout out particularly to Charity Jobs, who we work closely with on workforce data, with DCMS around the Community Life Survey. Much of the volunteering data is also done in partnership with them as well. So thank you to those partners. At around 12 o'clock, we'll have then a chance for audience question and answer. And hopefully we'll have a good kind of 20, 25 minutes where we can answer and explore your questions that you have. And then we'll finish no later than 12:30 with a couple of reflections from me at the very end. If you, a little bit of housekeeping, and I'll explain the questions on the housekeeping as well. If we can jump forward a couple of slides. We are kind of, there's lots of people, I'm sure, will have lots of questions to ask Nayara and the team. If you have a question, please try to not put it in the chat box, but to use the Q&A function. So on your menu bar, probably along the bottom, you'll see a button that says Q&A. Please try and put your question there, just because normally for the Almanac launches, the chat box gets very busy and very excited, and it just means that we might lose the question. We will try and keep track, but better to put it in the Q&A box along the bottom. We will, you'll notice that we have closed captions or subtitles enabled. And so if you want to turn these on or off, please, along the menu bar, you'll see an icon that says CC in the toolbar. Do use that if required. We've also just shared a PDF of the slide deck in the chat box as well. And so you can kind of access that as you wish as well. As I mentioned at the beginning, today's webinar is being recorded, but everyone is joining in view-only mode. So your cameras and microphones are automatically turned off, and only people, the only people that you'll be able to see on the recording of today's webinar is Nayara and I, and of course, the slides. So I think, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Nayara, who's going to talk us through the Almanac. Nayara, over to you.
Thank you, Alex. Hi, everyone. Really good to see you all here. So many of us joining us today. Thank you very much. My name is Nayara, and I lead our quantitative research and data program here at NCVO, particularly the Almanac. I come from a background of UK Waterworks centres, so my commitment has always been to influence policy and practice using robust evidence-based research. It's essential that we produce data that's not just informative, but also practical and policy-oriented. So very much interested in how we use data to influence decision-making for policies that impact charities. So today I've tried to bring together some insights from the Almanac that would hopefully be useful for you from both a policy and practice perspective. So I'll start off with just some background information on the need for reliable data on the state of the voluntary sector, and then move on to the key insights from the 2023 Almanac and what they mean for the sector. And this is the place where I'll be sharing quite a lot of information on different slides. I may not have enough time to go through all the slides in detail, but then we can come back to the details during the Q&A. And then finally, I'll end with how the Almanac data can help you and your organization. This year, we were also due to launch our Almanac data dashboard, which has been postponed. But we are working on it, and our data remains accessible and downloadable on our website for free. So please stay tuned for updates on our website and newsletters. Also, as Alex mentioned, really very excited to say that this year we have partnered up with Charity Job, the Charity Recruitment Job Board, to provide salary insights on the charity sector. So thank you very much to Charity Job for the bespoke data analysis. So let's start off. So what is the Almanac? The NCVO Almanac is a one-stop shop for reliable, robust data on the UK charity and voluntary sector finances, workforce, and volunteering. There is a need for reliable data on the state of the voluntary sector. The unprecedented demand for services during the pandemic and the current cost of living crisis has had a deep impact on the voluntary sector. And now more than ever, we need reliable data to understand the sector. And NCVO's Civil Society Almanac 2023 provides that critical data on the voluntary sector finances, volunteers, and workforce. We are the only ones that produce and compile a state of the sector annual report on the charity and voluntary sector using rigorous, robust research and big data analytics on the UK charity and voluntary sector. Our data is extremely reliable and robust, and also used by government departments such as ONS and DCMS in their sector estimates. We've been around a long time. We have been publishing the Civil Society Almanac for more than 25 years now. It takes enormous effort from start to finish, and a big thanks to my research team, Brad, Ray, Amy, Henry, for their hard work delivering high quality work at pace. We have a very unique historical data set that goes back 20 years, and we are constantly trying to build on new products or launch new products or existing products with new features every year. We are very much open to data partnerships. So if you're an organization looking to collaborate on data for the sector, do get in touch. And we have a number of partners, Charity Commission, from whom we get our financial accounts. We get our data from government data, ONS information, labor force survey, community life survey, NCVO's own research, time well spent survey, data from our partners, Scotland, SCVO, Northern Ireland, NICVA, and our academic partner, Queen's University Belfast, who analyze big data samples for us. So today I'll be talking about 5 key insights from the Almanac 2023. I'll start off with an overview of the sector, giving you an idea of the charity sector profile, then talk about the impact of the crisis and what it financially means for the sector. After that, I'll talk about charity sector salaries, and then recruitment, retention of volunteers and workforce, and finally talk a bit about diversity in the sector. So a quick overview of the number of charities, charity subsector, regional spread, and income. We found that this year the number of charities have gone down. it's gone down by 1% from last year, and this year it is 163,959 charities. We also found that charity closures went up slightly from 4,281 in 2021 to 5,542 in 2022. We saw that there was an impact on smaller organizations who have declined in both number and proportion of charities over time. So from the year 2000 to 2020, the total number of voluntary organizations has increased by 12%, but at the same time, the total number of micro-organizations, organizations with an income of less than 10,000, has steadily decreased each year and shrunk by 9% in the past 20 years. Let's take a look at some insights on charity subsectors. So in terms of subsectors, social services is the largest subsector, representing almost a fifth of all voluntary organizations. By income, the top three subsectors with more than 100 million income in the UK are: at the top, we have social services with 17 super major organizations, followed by health with 11 super major organizations, and then international work charities with 10 super major organizations. Super major organizations are those with more than 100 million income. By number of organizations, the top three subsectors with the highest number of organizations are social services, culture and recreation, followed by religion. These three have remained consistent from last year. In terms of the numbers of the subsectors with the lowest numbers of organizations, we have umbrella bodies, employment and training, and housing and research, which have very low numbers. Similarly, in terms of income, we have parent-teacher associations, village halls, scout groups, which have an annual income of less than £100,000 per year, and the median income of almost £10,000 to £11,000. Let's look at the top 10 charities by income. So charities and voluntary organizations that focus on international social services and research work, as you can see, make up 7 in the top 10 voluntary organizations by annual income. And in terms of the numbers of organizations, however, those organizations that work in international work and research subsectors are substantially smaller than the social services sector, which has the highest number of organizations at 31,000. Now let's take a look at the regional spread of organizations. Voluntary organizations are spread fairly evenly across the country, but most of the biggest organizations are based in London and the South. Larger organizations are more likely to be active nationally and internationally, while smaller organizations are more likely to operate locally. In fact, almost 75% of micro-organizations operate only on a local level. In contrast, 72% of super major organizations work nationally. The majority of voluntary organizations with the biggest assets are based in London and the South. In London, we have about almost 25,000, 24,991 charities, and the Southeast has 24,177 charities. So there are similar numbers in the London and the Southeast. The lowest proportion of charities are based in the Northeast, with just 1.6 organizations per 1,000 people. The Northeast also has the lowest percentage of charities and voluntary organizations in England. It's interesting that the South is also home to 50 of the 59 super major organizations, and out of that, 58% of those are based in London. The North, on the other hand, has 19% of large organizations. There's more data, and we can get into it during the Q&A. Let's take a look at sources of income and what the trends are. Despite an increase in government income in 2020-21, overall income of the sector declined by 3%, down from 58.7 billion in the previous year to 56.9 billion this year. And the public, as usual, remains the biggest income source for the second year in a row. Although due to increase in government income as a result of pandemic funding for charities It is no longer more than half of the sector's income as it was the previous year. Let's now go to the second key insight. This is just a summary of some key financial insights. For instance, the public, as I mentioned, remains the biggest source of income for the sector. 46% is contributed by the public, which forms around 26.4 billion. Public giving has decreased in both total income from the public and proportion of the sector's income that it makes up. Grant spending, on the other hand, is the only kind of spending that did not decline compared to the previous year. In terms of zero income, there are 9% of voluntary organizations who have reported zero income, which forms approximately 15,000 charities and voluntary organizations. About 83% of the sector income usually comes from just 4% of all voluntary organizations with an income of over 1 million. I want to delve a little bit deeper into the differences and the different unique situations and challenges that large charities and small charities face in terms of their finances. Let's take a look at charity spending first to understand that. So in terms of charity spending patterns, spending by charities has gone down from last year. The overall spending by charities is still very high, with 95% spending this year. And out of this, 69% of the spending goes to charitable activities. So were there any differences between charity size in terms of their spending behaviors? So the answer is yes. Compared with larger charities, small and micro organizations spend a larger proportion on charitable activities and a smaller proportion on grants, but they continue to spend a relatively large proportion on governance. The good thing is small charities are paying more on charitable activities, but perhaps there can be something to think about in terms of reducing inefficiencies maybe in governance costs. This is the second year in the row that public is the highest source of voluntary and charity sector income, and we found that smaller charities are increasingly dependent on the public for their income. They are also recipients of greater income proportion from the public than charities of large sizes. On the other hand, large organizations are more dependent on the government for their income. Contracts and grants are mainly awarded to large charities. And so I guess there's a question what it means for how commissioners would want to target who are their target bidders, and what that means for charities in applying for government grants and contracts as a whole. Worryingly, for large charities, this year we saw a decline in their income for the very first time. Also, in more than 10 years, we saw a decline in their numbers. The number of major charities decreased by 5%, and the income of super major charities saw the greatest level of decrease of 11% this year. I'll now be talking a bit about charity sector salaries. This is the first year that we are talking about vacancies and salary levels. In 2022, the UK job market saw a very candidate-driven job market. There were increased vacancies, fewer candidates, which resulted in decrease in demand for jobs and making it harder for charities to recruit, creating a recruitment problem in the sector. Average salaries increased from 30,800 2 years ago to 32,200 in 2022, with increases in average salary over this period at all experience levels. Let's go into the different salary insights now. Compared to 2 years ago, the total number of general charity jobs posted increased by 60%, and the average salaries increased by 5%. Medium charities, interestingly, on average, pay the least, even when compared to micro and small charities. Super major charities, it's not a surprise, they pay the most across all workplace types, but micro and small charities pay more for on-site roles than medium, large, and super major charities do. Medium charities pay the least for both on-site roles as well as off-site remote roles. On-site roles at major charities were the largest single category of jobs available at 5,550 opportunities, followed by hybrid and on-site roles at large charities, with each having about 4,000 jobs available. In line with overall trends, the average salaries for both hybrid and remote roles have seen the largest increases, each by 17%, while average salaries for on-site roles have decreased by 2%. Part of this may be linked to senior positions generally being better paid and more organizations wanting to retain senior personnel while giving them flexible working options or remote working benefits. Let's go into the next few slides for details on senior personnel pay. As expected, average salaries increase as the experience level requirement increases. So from £23,000 at entry level to almost £60,000 for directors. Average salaries for junior roles have seen the highest increase in the past 2 years at 7%, followed by experienced non-managerial roles at 6%. And these levels have also seen the highest increases in the number of roles available, with the number of junior roles increasing by 77%, and experienced non-manager roles increasing by 75%. The number of director level roles has doubled in the past 2 years, while the average salary for senior executive roles has decreased by 3% from 2 years ago. However, the number of jobs available at this level have increased by 50%. While for entry-level and junior roles, there were no significant differences between average salaries across organization sizes. However, for the higher level, higher experience levels, we saw that there were notable differences across organization sizes, which means that higher salaries were offered by larger charities at each level of experience. Let's talk now about the fourth insight, which is on recruitment and retention. I'll start by talking a bit about volunteers and workforce and what, just a summary of some figures on the state of volunteering and workforce in the charity sector, followed by retention and recruitment factors in volunteering and the charity sector workforce. So just a quick overview, really. As you can see from the numbers of charity sector workforce is quite small. It's little under 1 million people who work in the voluntary sector. It's about 3% of the UK workforce. However, most of the workforce work in even smaller organizations. So almost 3/5 of voluntary sector employees worked for smaller organizations with less than 50 employees. And most of them, a third of them actually, work from home or hybrid. And the numbers of people, of charity sector workers who work from home are higher than those who work in the public and private sectors. Now let's take a quick look at the volunteering figures. As you can see, volunteer numbers are really high in the UK. We have 14.2 million people who volunteer through a group, club, or organization. And most of them are about 1 in 5 people volunteer at least once a month. Slightly concerning that formal volunteering levels are going down. However, volunteer numbers for informal volunteering are pretty high at about a quarter of people who do so, who volunteer at least once a month. So what can volunteer managers do to retain talent? So you can do this by understanding volunteering motivations and to tap into them. The top 3 motivations for volunteers are, the first one is wanting to improve things or to help people. And 48% of people said they wanted to improve things and help people. About a third, a little more than a third, I think, 33%, they said that they had a personal connection to the cause, and close to a third said they have the spare time to volunteer. These top 3 reasons for volunteering have remained relatively unchanged over the years. What this means for volunteer management and retention is probably to target tailored strategies that align with these top 3 volunteering motivations. Let's look at what the figures look like for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic volunteers, or as we call global majority volunteers. So unlike the general public, for global majority volunteers, the most important values were diversity and inclusion, culture of respect and trust, was the most important value that people from global majority backgrounds valued in volunteering. This information comes from our time well spent research, and we are going to publish more detailed insights on the global majority findings next month on the 28th of November. So if you want further detailed insights on global majority volunteers, please do attend that event next month. We found that time and commitment are the main barriers for both general population and global majority volunteers. So that feels like an important insight. It's a common barrier for both people from general populations and global majority backgrounds. Now let's take a look at what recruitment and retention look like for the charity sector workforce. The most cited reason was having to complete long application forms, which was seen as a huge deterrent. Another deterrent was not hearing back from recruiters about job applications, which was reported by 54% of candidates. I think this is something for organizations who are struggling with recruitment to think a little bit more about on how they can reduce the pain points in the charity sector workforce recruitment process. For workforce retention, seems that some benefits are really valued by those who work in the charity sector. So things like more than 25 days annual leave, not including bank holidays, remote working options, and flexible working hours. Let's move on to diversity now, diversity in the sector workforce and volunteering. I'll first be talking about volunteering demographics and then move on to workforce demographics. So what does diversity in volunteering look like? The numbers have remained unchanged. People aged over 65 have maintained their levels of formal volunteering. On the other hand, participation in all other age groups has dropped. What does it look like for those from minority ethnic backgrounds or global majority backgrounds? We found that formal volunteering is higher among those from mixed ethnic backgrounds compared to those even identifying as white or Asian or any other backgrounds. This is a slight change from last year, where we saw that Black volunteers were the highest number of volunteers. In any case, people from global majority backgrounds form a huge chunk of volunteers. Groups with the highest monthly volunteering was seen among women, those aged in older age groups 65 to 74, those who have a disability, and those who identify as from being a mixed ethnic group. Now let's look at what the picture looks like for diversity in the charity sector workforce. No surprises here. Women, as usual, continue to make up 2/3 of the voluntary sector workforce, and this number has remained pretty much consistent over the years. Again, by age as well, there are very low numbers of under 25s in the voluntary sector workforce. And it has continued to remain low compared to both the private and the public sector over the years. By ethnic diversity, there's less ethnic diversity in the voluntary sector workforce than both the public and private sectors. However, there's a slight increase. It's not a very significant increase, but there's been a slight increase from the past year. There are 9% global majority employees in the voluntary sector, and with a similar number of Asian and Black employees, 3.5% Asians and 2.5% Black employees in the charity sector workforce. The number of disabled people is growing in the charity sector, with just over 1 in 4 people who identify themselves as being disabled in the voluntary sector. So this is a little more than a quarter, so 26% of disabled staff in the charity sector workforce. So I've just given you a rundown of just literally a tiny fragment of the Almanac's findings. The important thing to highlight is that the Almanac is not just a report, it is a data resource. and you can use it yourself to investigate various aspects of the sector. So what are the things you can do? How can you use the Almanac data to help you and your organization? You can use it first and foremost in your influencing. You can use the data to influence policy and campaigns. You can use it for your work, talking to government or your local authorities about what you do and make the case for your sector. You can use it to understand the potential impact of government decisions on the sector. You can use it to understand the various sources of income and how they are changing. So you can use it for things like identifying gaps in your funding streams, conduct risk analysis across these streams, benchmark against other organizations. You can use the data on the funding environment, workforce, or volunteers to feed into your board's decision-making process and other strategic thinking. You can also use it to understand diversity and inclusion issues within the sector. You can identify potential recruitment strategies and think about the long-term implications for the sector workforce and volunteers. It's massive, so please do take a look at the full data, and don't forget it's there when you're scrabbling around for information about the sector. And of course, you can always contact NCVO for more information about the Almanac or indeed any other issues that it raises. We have some time for Q&A in the end, and I'm going to hand over to Alex at this point to take the questions from our audience.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Nayara. A kind of virtual round of applause for getting through kind of such an enormous spread of data, not just particularly the kind of different kind of parts of whether it was kind of overall financials and the state of the sector, whether it was around workforce or kind of volunteering, a huge kind of like breadth and depth of insight that you've shared with us. So thank you, Nayara. We have an enormous amount of questions, and so I'm just going to let Nayara just take a minute just to kind of quickly look at some of the questions that we have that I'll then pose. We had quite a number of questions in both the chat box but also in the Q&A about the methodologies. And whilst we might just say a couple of things about the methodology, we have a number of pages on the full Almanac website that list our kind of full methodology, both for the things that NCVO ourselves kind of analyze, particularly say around definitions. So what do we define as a small or a micro or a large organization? How do we kind of even define charities? How do we take subsectors? And so I would advise to take a look at all of the kind of detail that sits behind there as well. As part of the About section on the website, we also then talk about how we have taken data from other sources and either where they have analysed it, what they might have done with it, or if we have then taken that raw data and analysed it, what have we done with it? You can also see the full published data as well, which is available to download on the Almanac website too. So I tried to answer through the Q&A quite a number of the methodological questions as they came in, but there were just a couple of things I just want to pick up just to give Nayara a small breather. So Caroline asked a question around categories and kind of do the categories and the types of way in which we report on like the labeling, I suppose, of charities, are they kind of fit for purpose? And I suppose we would say they are limited. So we use a version of the International Classification of Non-Profit Organizations, the ICMPO. And that's because it enables us and others to kind of have an international comparison as well. And those are the kind of 18 subsectors that classification has listed. But we do know they are limited. And we've worked quite closely in the recent years with Chris Dam and David Kane through a partnership at Sheffield Hallam, looking at charity classifications and how we might be able to create a far bigger set of tags, essentially, so we get a kind of much more nuanced understanding, because we know that a charity that does social services possibly might have 5 other ways in which it might categorize itself. So we know that things like that are very limited. And just there was another question just on kind of inflation, and just say what we do adjust for inflation each year. So kind of it is directly comparable to previous years. There was a question particularly from Tom Burke around whether we've adjusted then the kind of classification, say small, micro, if actually £30,000 is worth less than it was before. I think that's certainly something that we can look into as well. Nayara, lots of questions for you. So let me come to you with a couple of questions. First of all, can you tell us a little bit more about larger organisations? Particularly, they seem to be more concentrated in the south, quite a stark kind of set of data you then said around the kind of south and north divide. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think the majority of voluntary organizations with the biggest assets are based in London and the South. As I mentioned in my presentation, both the London and the Southeast have similar numbers of organizations, which are the highest in the region out of all regions. The highest ratio, in fact, in England, out of the London, Southeast, Southwest, and the East of England, is for the Southwest, with three voluntary organizations for every 1,000 people, which means what it means is that 63% of organizations are based in London and the South combined. Compare that to the North. In the North, we have 19% of all large, major, and super major organizations. Around half of these 9% are based in the Northwest, along with only 4 super major organizations in the North. And 12% of larger organizations are based in the Midlands. The Northeast, Yorkshire, and Humber have no super major voluntary organizations at all. However, I do want to mention it at this point that these voluntary organizations, where these voluntary organizations are based is not necessarily where their beneficiaries are or where they spend their money. So it could be that an organization which is typically headquartered in London or somewhere in the South may actually be spending money in the North, in the Northeast. So they'll have beneficiaries and spread across the country. But because we take the figures of those organizations based on where they are based, like if an organization's address is saying it's based in London, that is why it seems as if there's all the income is distributed in the London and the South. It's what we call the headquarter effect. So I hope this explains why larger organizations seem to be concentrated in London and the Southeast. Although in terms of spending, there should not be any differences. Does that explain, does that help answer your question?
Thank you, it does, Noah. Just a small follow-up to that one before moving on. So another question was around London in particular. So is it also around population? So is it also that kind of you get more charities disproportionately in areas of larger populations? And is there any insight that you might be able to tell us about that?
I think that's a good question. I think in terms of in terms of the number of people who are catered to, there are two organizations per 1,000 people for the Midlands. This is slightly lower than the English average of catering to 2.3 organizations per 1,000 people. And then I think Wales was similar to England, English figures, and Scotland was higher than England. And the lowest was in the Northeast.
Great.
I think it was 1.6 organizations per 1,000 people.
Great. So more detail there around that kind of breakdown. I'm going to ask you a few questions now, Nara, just around assets, actually, something that you haven't really mentioned too much in the presentation, but certainly something that we at NCVO have been talking a lot around climate change and sustainability. So something I wanted to pick up with you. So does the Almanac give information on assets? And I mean, does it tell us around kind of organizations that do have assets and that don't have assets?
Yeah. Yes, we do. We do report on assets in the Almanac. In fact, this year we found that about 24,000 organizations reported having zero assets, and the numbers are always increasing of organizations with zero income, zero assets. So yeah, have a look. You can get detailed breakdown of assets in the almanac. Yeah, there are organizations with no assets as well, and it forms about 15%, I think, of all voluntary organizations.
Thank you. And if you missed a couple of months ago, we launched our Fueling Positive Change campaign, which was focused on asking charities and voluntary organizations to look at where their money was being invested in fossil fuels as part of our kind of sector response to the climate crisis. And so for those organizations, particularly those who do have assets, please do take a look. Assets and investments, please do look at our Fueling Positive Change campaign to find out more about some of the options to make that money work really positively for the environment. Thank you, Michelle, and colleagues, kind of putting live chat links as we kind of talk about things ourselves. Nara, I'm going to stick with income for a little bit and ask a couple of questions there, and then I'm going to ask a couple of questions on salary and a few other things. So income has dropped. Sector income has dropped, kind of one of the kind of big stories coming out of today. Can you tell us just a little bit more about where that drop comes from? And can you then tell us a little bit more about the income from government and how is that changing, or how has that changed, particularly in relation to, say, grants or contracts? And I put those two things together because, of course, many colleagues on this call will remember that year saw a large kind of amount of funding coming from government, 750 million from government coming into the sector in response to many of our sector-wide campaigns to get that money from the government at the start of the pandemic, as well as money then that did come to the sector from things like furlough and kind of other grants. So that's just a little bit of context about what was going on, obviously, in that year. I don't need to remind many people what was going on in that year. So tell us a little bit more. Where's that drop? Where are we seeing that drop, that 1.8 billion overall sector income decrease? And can you tell us a little bit more about that government income and what might be going on there?
I think that's a really good question on income, because this year we saw there was a 4.6 billion decrease in income for small charities, while for the same period we saw a similar increase of a similar amount of 4.6 billion for larger organizations. So that felt really interesting. I mean, I wouldn't say money from small and micro organizations are going to large charities per se, but it's tied to government income increasing during this period for larger charities. Larger charities typically tend to get more government income, and particularly for this period, when because of COVID grants during the pandemic, larger charities saw an extra injection of funds that may have increased the amount for larger charities in terms of their government income. I wouldn't want to directly say that larger charities are taking income from small charities, because that wouldn't be the right, probably wouldn't be the right connection to draw. I would link it more to the pandemic and government income increasing for larger charities as being the cause for larger charities having an increased income of the similar amount that was reduced for smaller charities. That felt quite convoluted. I'll move on to income for government. Majority of the income is through government contracts, about 13 billion income, compared to government grants, which makes up about 4 billion pounds of income. So government contracts are definitely worth more than government contracts. And government contract sizes are almost a third compared to that of government contracts. Does that answer your question, Alex?
It does, and I'm going to ask you again in a moment. I'm going to pick up on one thing and just say, can you tell us a bit more about where that 1.8 billion decrease overall has come from? Just while you kind of find the answer, a really interesting thing that you said there was around what we see is the smaller organizations losing kind of 4.8 billion and kind of large organizations gaining that. I think what you really helpfully, I think, said there was it was not just about money moving from one to the other, but actually the kinds of situations that perhaps large organizations were in or would be in. For example, they might have paid staff that they put on furlough. They might have had more access to they might have been providing more of the direct services that may have been eligible for some of the kind of 750 million there as well that was kind of government funding. So what you're kind of saying actually there is it's not just that money moved from a different part of the sector, though you could see that just by looking at the numbers. It's more that if you looked at the smaller end of the sector, kind of micro organizations, for example, less than 10K, which actually kind of turnover less than 10K per year, which make up 47% of the sector, actually those organizations just might not have been eligible for much of the kind of funding that might have been coming from government, particularly in response to the pandemic. Nara, anything just more on the overall funding loss, and then we'll move on to look at some kind of salary data.
Yeah, I think public income has decreased because of the pandemic. We saw a lot of non-essential services provided by charities weren't available for a large proportion of the year, and charities were unable to generate funds through charity shops and fundraising events. So I think that definitely had an impact on why public income decreased. Did you have another question on large charities?
No, that was good. That was great. I think clear that kind of and matching many other trends, I guess, that we see and that we still see that long tail of in terms of a decline in essentially some areas in the number of people who are kind of public giving to charity. When they might be giving kind of fewer amounts or fewer donations, less amount of money each time. Something that we know certainly many of our partner organizations in terms of their giving reports are kind of noting that particularly.
Yeah,
and we see
public
that
donations are decreasing. Yeah, public giving has decreased. And this has also impacted larger organizations, even though they do get a fair share of government income. Still, over the years, we've seen that larger organizations have been impacted because this is the first year that we have seen super major charities with more than 1 million income, more than 100 million in income, their sizes have decreased, their incomes have decreased this year. So it's definitely having an impact. And even though this is, again, the second year in a row that public income is the highest source of income, still the amount of income has decreased. In fact, this has affected the total, when you look at the overall trends, this is the first time in almost 10 years since 2012 that we've had such a decline in sector income.
It's a huge moment in kind of over a decade to see that drop of steady increase up until this point. Yeah. And I think many organizations will have felt it, but I think this is the first time in our report today that we see that kind of definitive kind of look at the sector finances for that time. Yeah. Nara, I want to, we've got about 5 minutes more just on questions. Can you tell us, we'll talk a little bit about salary data, because it's one of the new things as part of the Almanac this year. A few questions from the kind of discussion just around kind of the methodology. So just tell us a little bit about what's the methodology for the data? Are we looking, how have we done that analysis? Where is that kind of based from? Is it advertised salaries or vacancies or the actual salaries within the charities? Tell us a little bit more about kind of that data and the partnership we've got with Charity Jobs. Yeah.
I think that's a good question because I've been wanting to address, I saw a couple of questions on salary, I've been wanting to answer those. So I think just to say quickly, these jobs, the salary data has been obtained from our data partner Charity Job, who took it off from the jobs posted on the charity job website. The salary averages are actually mean. It's not median. So they are average salaries. And the number of jobs posted were about 21,000. One very important point to mention is we gave charity job our definition of what a general charity is, and based off that definition, charity job analyzed and categorized the different charities and job roles and job positions using our definitions. So the definitions for the salaries also match with the definitions that we've used in the almanac.
Now, you also mentioned that you'd seen a number of the questions that you wanted to answer around salaries. Do you want to just kind of answer some of the questions instead of me posing them to you?
Yeah. I think I'll look at. So Jack has asked, can you talk us through the method for the salary data? I think I gave a few headlines on the salary data methodology. There's more detail in our report. We looked at a couple of things. We looked at average salaries by subsector. The subsector definitions were also taken from our from the almanac, so that it aligns with the almanac. And then the job roles were those posted on the salary on the charity job website. There was a question on whether we report on average pay or median pay, but because charity job have always been reporting on average pay, we decided to go with average pay. Maybe in future years we could report on median pay. It's possible using that data to report on median pay. It would mean a slight change in the methodology on that, though.
And Nara, do we know how some of this data compares to other sectors? So particularly to private and public sector?
No, we did not compare. Salaries of private versus public. That's something we could potentially do in future years. We do usually compare public, private, and voluntary sector in terms of workforce. So a number of people who work from home, hybrid working, remote working, total number of workers, minority ethnic groups, diversity, and things like that, but not compared salaries. Although there are indications. We haven't reported this, but we did find from other government data, that actually the charity sector tends to pay less than private and public, which is why you'll see that number of under 25s are usually low, and you'll see more numbers of under 25s working in the public and private sector, and perhaps salary has a role to play in it.
Thank you, Naira. I'm afraid we have run out of time for questions, and we need to pause there. We had an enormous number of questions, kind of 30 odd questions, that we never get enough time to explore. I would just signpost people, particularly those who have methodological questions. We are fully transparent on all of the kind of analysis that we do, and try to explain that, not just to say what we did, but really to explain it, so that it's all on the About page section of the Almanac website. And you can see also then how we also do the methodology that we worked with charity jobs and other bits of data that we also use. For closing, I would just say, first of all, just say a few thank yous. So an enormous thank you. I'm sure you'll join me, those on the call, in thanking Nayara, who leads the Almanac from NCVO, and her fantastic colleague Brad, our colleague Brad, who does a terrific amount of work behind the scenes around the data science, a kind of powerful combination of the two of them, supported ably by our wider research team of Amy and Henry. We are really proud of the partnership that we've created with Charity Jobs, being specific to the sector, as a kind of jobs support service for charities. And so thank you to Charity Jobs for that partnership, and also our other partners on the Almanac, particularly Queen's University Belfast, who process previously 10,000 PDFs to make this report possible, that we couldn't do without them, and funding from the ESRC as well that enables that. So thank you enormously. I also just want to give an enormous shout out, particularly to those who use this data, particularly other partners in the sector, the Third Sector Research Centre, Lloyds Bank Foundation for England and Wales, and kind of particularly the strong partnership that we have with DCMS on things like the Community Life Survey, but also other bits of work that we do. I've also not kind of talked particularly around the volunteering questions we haven't mentioned here. We have a new report, Time Well Spent, focusing on the volunteer experience of the global majority. And that report is launching on the 28th of November at 10:15 in the morning until 11:30. Please sign up. It comes straight off the back of our Time Well Spent publication from July. And so please do book for that. It's a huge amount of insight there to be gleaned about people's differing experiences, both of the global majority and then how that compares to others who are volunteering. And so there'll be some really good kind of insights being shared there. Lots of the volunteering questions that people asked, lots of that can be found both in the Time Well Spent report that we've published, but also on the Almanac website. In a moment, you will see a feedback poll that will pop up, and we'd really love your survey, your feedback. There will also be a follow-up email with a form as well, and we'd also really appreciate if you can give us your thoughts and feedback. One final thought is that we at NCVO are always trying to look at how we can improve the work that we do. So that's why we really value your feedback. But one of the things that we've heard over the previous years is about the want to have more digital products that enhance the offer of the Almanac. So the ability to look at that data by nation or by subsector particularly, or by size plus subsector by nation. And we very much want to develop that. So we're working closely with colleagues in our digital team and across the sector to create a digital product that sits alongside this. In the meantime, you have all the data that's accessible and downloadable from the website, but stay tuned for more ways in which we hope we'll be able to kind of use and manipulate the Almanac data, that you'll be able to do that to suit your particular needs as well. My final thing before we close, just to thank Nick and the Networks team who support our events. He's been beavering away in the chat box and making sure all of this runs brilliantly and smoothly. Should you want to watch all of this all over again, you can access this in the coming days on our YouTube channel and look at all of that data there again. So I think it only leaves me to say an enormous thank you for joining us this morning and this afternoon. Please share using Almanac 23 and do get in touch with us at NCVO if you would like some more information. So thank you very much and have a good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.